About 2 weeks ago, I was at the gym doing my squat exercises, and I noticed that the bar was a bit different than the bar that I was used to, but I still managed to do my full warm out and 3 sets of 10 times 120 kilograms. And then as I aimed to the last set, in which I have always done 15 kilograms, at least in the last couple of months, I failed. I did only 14 repetitions, partly because I felt the bar move a little bit in a strange way towards the end. So I did 14 instead of 15, and I felt an enormous sense of failure. And only yesterday, I redeemed myself and went back to my old successful set with a bar that I like. Now, why do I tell this? Because I read a post in Facebook by my trainer in Israel, who wrote, especially for people my age, so over 40, you should allow yourself sometimes to give up on some exercises while you're at the gym, but don't give up on the full training. Show up. That's the best way to maintain your body, especially again when you're older. You avoid injuries, but you keep your body healthy. And I thought about this very smart advice, and as many advice of my trainer, I try to think how I implement it in my work as a teacher. And I find that the implementation is actually very, very direct. I believe that when you are studying or writing, for example, when you're writing a long project like a thesis, MA thesis or a dissertation, you should sometimes allow yourself some freedom to make shorter sessions of writing, to wander a little bit on YouTube as you write, to not write perfectly, but you shouldn't give up on a session of writing. I will explain why in this session. My name is Shai Dotan. I am Associate Professor of International Public Law at the University of Copenhagen Faculty of Law, and the purpose of this series of lectures is to help you improve your English and your research skills. Make no mistakes, I'm not trying to advocate here failure, okay, or failing to have proper habits. I very much enjoyed James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, which I read in German, because I think it really shows the idea that you can build habits that help you to succeed. I know that I'm aiming to 15 repetitions on my last squat. I know that I've done it successfully last week and the week before that and the week before that. This is an immense psychological tool. So I don't advocate failing as something that you should do easily. But still, I think that sometimes if you give up during a writing session, you're still going to produce something valuable. So even though writing sessions are, as far as possible, should be done within the proper habits. So no disturbances, write in scheduled times. Hopefully, if you're able to, even in the same time, you write in a particular manner. All this is fine. But at the same time, when I look at the work of students over many, many years of experience, I always tell my students, the number of times you open the computer and work for more than 30 minutes is for me the best predictor of how good your grade is going to be on your thesis. Because I know that sometimes when you work, and again, let's say opening the computer and working on 30 minutes almost uninterrupted is the minimum, okay? The maximum would be, I don't know, working 3 hours with full concentration and all the information that you have gathered in advance and all the bullet points organized in advance. So somewhere between those two options of a mediocre work for half an hour and an amazing work for 3 hours, there's a lot of different positions where you can actually make a contribution. And each one of them adds something to the research. So something, let's say you're not concentrated and you managed to work for only 45 minutes, but you had a new idea that arrived to you during this time. Now, you cannot quantify how important this idea is. Maybe you will write 10 pages about it later, but you need this idea to begin with. So that's why it's useful to have all these sessions and all of them have contributions that accumulate. Sometimes you don't write very well, you edit what you wrote. Sometimes you write very quickly but not very well. Okay, the draft is very messy, but you can edit it later on and you have a lot of text added. Sometimes you read, and the same goes exactly the same for studying. If you go into the habit of reading every day in English, it's not going to be the same quality every day. Sometimes you'll be interrupted, sometimes the book is boring, sometimes you will focus more on checking words in the dictionary, sometimes on reading quickly, sometimes on your own fantasy and ideas that come to you, but every session adds something. And because different quality of work and concentration are supportive of different types of contributions, you need all these contributions to accumulate. And that's why I'm saying to my students, make as many sessions as possible. You start early, you write the full time that you have, so you have 100 days, 150 days is a time where you can devote to the thesis. Try to write once or twice every day, and every time you will add something new. And the other benefit is, of course, if you do that so regularly that you're making a lot of sessions, even if they're imperfect sessions, your mind thinks about the problem even when you're not working. Okay, so that's your mind constantly goes back to this, to the research that you're doing, or even to the topic that you're studying when you're sleeping, when you are not doing anything else. The mind automatically goes there and adds more and more and more contributions that accumulate over time. That's exactly the secret of success. It's not just having great habits. James Clear is correct. Having great habits is great. But getting back to the struggle of writing, of studying, or of training day after day in very, very often as many possibilities that you can to make contributions. So as many small sessions as possible, even if the sessions are not perfect, will lead to better results. Now, the second reason I'm advocating this willingness to give up on a working session, for example, has something to do with your own psychology. My fear is that you will be so afraid of failing that you will not even start. Okay? So once you start writing, the best way to motivate you may be that you want to stick to a really good habit, so you are afraid of failure. But if your fear is much greater, is so great, maybe you will not even start this pursuit. You will not start the session at all to avoid the failure. Now, this is something that in economics is often used as a distinction between ex ante and ex post. So ex ante, before you start, you want to try to mitigate the fear of failure, because this fear can prevent you from starting to begin with. Ex post, once you already started, you want to increase the fear of failure, because if you do that, you will have the best possible habit. So you will do the ultimate session as much as possible. You see the problem? I face that many times at the gym. Before I start a set, I would try to convince myself that that's the easiest as possible, and if I want, I can also stop if I want that. While I'm doing the set, I'm stuck in a situation where I am trying to convince myself that stopping is a terrible sin, and it would also damage me in the future, because then I will be afraid more of a set to be later on. So the same thing applies when you're doing a studying session. Many times people don't start because they have a fear of failure. This is something that Jordan Peterson often have spoken about. He said one of the worst things that is preventing you from succeeding is that you're afraid of producing bad work. You're afraid of failure. You want to fight against this fear. Produce something, even if it's not perfect. The example that Jordan Peterson says is he uses with his students. He tells them, imagine that I would give you 4 hours to produce a draft, and it has to be 2 pages long, and it can be terrible. Nothing will happen to you, but you have to write 2 pages. Will you be able to do it? The answer is obviously yes. Everybody will be able to do it. So start by doing that, and then you can build on that. And that's a very smart way to think about this problem. So ex ante, before you start a session, try to convince yourself that you can't give up, that it will not be considered failure. Afterwards, when you start to write, try to convince yourself that you try to develop the best habits possible. Now, obviously, this is a bit conflicting, but we have a possibility to convince ourselves in a variety of ways. We try to shape our biases in a correct way. So you don't want to have things that disturb you unnecessarily. So for example, things that give you alerts of all kinds of emails or messages. If you can't turn it off, that's great. If you can't close all the windows for other programs on your computer, that's great. Some people would even lock it in a particular way that would prevent them from going on YouTube unless they wait for a few minutes, which we will not do because they already should be in the flow of writing. That's fine. My point of the matter is the focus of this lecture is not on a focus on habits that you should adopt as you write. I spoke about this before, but on the fact that you should really sit down and do the sessions. Telling to yourself, I can give up, I can write imperfectly, I can write not in a perfect habits, but the most important thing is that I start to write. And then when you're doing that, you avoid the biggest fear that prevents people from starting. And because starting is the most difficult part, start in the process of getting better at studying or at writing. This is exactly what you need to conquer. This is why allow yourself to give up during the sessions, even if it means imperfect habits, to get yourself ready to the idea that this is potentially a failure, but it's a failure that is acceptable. The third and final reason why I think you should allow yourself sometimes to give up during sessions, but you should never skip a session of study if you're able to, is the following. Most of the work that is done, that is important for your success, is actually based on very mediocre human emotions. Okay, this is not on amazing successes or shows of valor and bravery and brilliance and talent. None of that. It's just a lot of mediocre work. It's obviously true at the gym. When I try to think about it, let's say yesterday I had a good training. Maybe there will be 1 second that I enjoyed. It was actually the time I did the 15th repetition of a squat with 120 kilograms. I remember it. I remember this second. That was really kind of a battle of minds. All the rest is a very, very long warm-up and then set after set after set and doing exactly the same weight and exactly the same technique that I did tens of thousands of times, all the time being careful not to injure myself. You think that my work, my main work as a researcher is different? Not at all. It's the same thing. And I'm not just talking about the job, the parts of the job that are designed in a way to be relatively boring and not innovative. So for example, grading exams or teaching the same class that I taught already many times. When I do that, sometimes you find interesting ideas, sometimes you enjoy the class, but it's basically repeating things that you have done quite a few times already and just trying to do them at the best quality that you can. But even if you're dealing with something that is like producing a book, and I produced a book over many years, then most of the work that goes to it is really very mediocre. So, I mean, you have to read hundreds of papers and books, think about ideas slowly, write the ideas down, repeat, edit it, do the proofs, all this process, thousands and thousands of hours that go into something, and in no moment, almost at all, you find moments of brilliance. You find sometimes moments of brilliance when you're taking a shower or you're going in nature or sometimes in front of your desk at work. It happens. You have these ideas of eureka moments. You have these great ideas, but that's not really what makes the work count. So the point is that if you are, you get used to the fact that your work, most of your work is not something that is exciting or something that to be remembered. You are getting ready to view yourself in a more lenient way. And this would say you go into a session of studying, you're not perfect, okay? You stopped after 15 minutes and you checked your email. You stopped after another 15 minutes and you watch something on YouTube, maybe some motivation movie to help you study. You look at it at the end of the day and you say, look, I've been at my desk for 6 hours and the work that I produced is something that is equivalent of 2 hours. I'm a terrible person. No, you're a much better person than the person that didn't sit down for 6 hours and didn't produce his 2 hours of work. So because of the first point that I mentioned, maybe you actually produce more than 2 hours of work, because there's a lot of passive work going on. You thought about the ideas, you change things, you organize your notes. But even if you take that out of a picture, you still have, through this struggling that is boring and annoying and leads to a very, very bad personal image, you manage to produce something, the equivalent of 2 hours of excellent, top-notch work. And that is something that is really worth being proud of. And this is why, for these 5 reasons, I think it is important to give up sometimes during a session and not make it the best possible habit, but don't give up on a session of work or a session of study, on your writing, on your reading. Try to do it regularly, as often as possible. If you are employed as a researcher and you're not doing other things, this is your work. You go to work every day. Either you work at the office or you work some days at home, but you spend a significant amount of time, it can be 6, 7, 8 hours, doing your work. And sometimes it will not be perfect, but eventually it will accumulate and it would lead to good things. Exactly because it will attack the subject from multiple angles, and each contributes something to the endeavor that you're at. Because of the first point, because you will not be afraid to start and you will not get a writing block. And that's the second point. And because a lot of boring contributions that are very, very small, sometimes imperceptible when you view them as individuals, come together to create something great. And that's exactly what is your aim. This can be either producing a great work of research or producing a well-rounded intellectual mind that studies new things using this technique.